We will look for tracking on any of the parts. Tracking is referred to as white traces, where the ignition may be traveling through the insulated parts instead of the spark plug. This can be seen on the spark plug boot at times. Also at the joint where my finger is pointing, where the coil goes from the extension to the boot adapter. You can see tracking white here at times. Also pitting and cracks. If the material is cracked, pitted, or shows signs of white tracking, the spark has traveled through the coil into the cylinder head instead of the spark plug, and the coil extension should be replaced at this time. We will show examples of these failure modes in future video. The other end of the coil is where it actually screws to the extension and the coil meet each other. This can be disassembled by unscrewing the coil extension from the coil housing itself. By doing this, it will allow us to inspect the mating surfaces and for any cracks or damage as well. We have also seen tracking or pitting on the coil nut or the adapter nut, so you can visibly inspect this area to make sure there's no tracking or damage to this part. I would also slide the nut down and inspect the extension itself to validate that nothing is cracked or broken here. You can inspect the face of both of these parts in a similar manner, looking for any signs of arcing or ignition tracing. The last step we want to do is a resistance check. So you take a simple volt ohm meter and check the resistance of the extension from one end to the other. Here are some examples of the different failure modes. On this coil extension, you can see the pitting circled in yellow here, right to where the boot adapter connects to the extension. This is a sign of a damaged coil. You can also pull the boot out of here. I do not see any tracking on this boot, but if you look in the coil, which is not possible on a video, you can see the tracking inside as well. Here's an example of a cracked boot extension. As I rotate the coil, you can see that it is actually visibly cracked on the extension housing. This will also prevent the coil from working properly, and the coil extension must be replaced. The third example is an actual example where the nut was pulled off of the extension during maintenance. This obviously is evident because the nut is in a separate piece, and you can also see that the coil extension is cracked. This coil extension is not reusable and must be replaced. The final example is a coil that shows significant arcing through the nut. Here you can see right by the green line, you can see significant arcing through that nut compared to other areas in the nut. It is a single point. If I remove the coil extension, I can clearly see that there is severe arcing across the coil face, and it's marked with a green line. That's the same place where the tracking came out. So this is a very quick procedure to see that by removing that. You can also see it, a burned residue on the coil extension itself. This failure mode can be mitigated by slightly separating, when you remove them and disassemble them, be sure to push it back together to seat this spring, because upon removal we may separate this slightly as the nut and as you pull the force out. So by separating them and reforcing them together, the nut will hold this extension together correctly and prevent this failure mode from happening.